Poor literacy is a trillion-dollar problem. English literacy is a fast track out of poverty for millions of people in the developing world. It's a survival skill for people in English-speaking countries, and it is increasingly required for participation in the modern economy. People with poor literacy have few job opportunities and low pay. They are more likely to be on welfare. They are more likely to be incarcerated. The Economist points out that it's actually cheaper to send someone to Harvard than it is to send them to jail. People with poor literacy and their families are more likely to suffer poor health. Imagine what it's like not being able to read your child's pill bottle. They can't read to their children or help them to learn to read. By the time their kids get to kindergarten, their children will hear less, 32 million words less than children in a high education family. This is called word poverty. These children start behind and can spend years or even a lifetime trying to catch up. Some never learn to read. This is called intergenerational illiteracy. Now, Australia is not exempt. The Gonski report states that 1 in 4 Year 4 students struggles to understand what they read, and 1 in 7 15-year-olds is at risk of leaving school without basic reading and writing skills. What kind of future will these kids have? The Australian Bureau of Statistics reports that a staggering 44% of Australians have insufficient literacy for coping with the demands of modern life and work. What are these people going to do when machine learning starts automating low literacy jobs? Studies in other English-speaking countries show similar levels of poor literacy. It's harder for non-native English speakers. In addition to having to learn to read, they have to learn to discriminate spoken English and learn pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar. Poor literacy is a really expensive problem, and with reduced national productivity and tax revenues, and with higher government expenditure, it literally affects every single one of us. One of the causes of poor English literacy is the erratic spelling of English. The English language problem is this. There are 42 phonemes or sounds in English, but there are only 26 letters. So letters make more than one sound. Sometimes letters are silent. Sign has a silent G, but what about signature? It's not consistent. How do students know which letters are silent when they come across a new word? Syllabification is complex. Mishap, reality, converged and converted. They have one character difference, but one is a 2-syllable word, one is a 3-syllable word. And it's not just letters. OUGH makes how many sounds? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Current teaching strategies try to address the erratic spelling of English by using pronunciation rules and rote memorization of exceptions. But how well do these rules work? We've developed the silent E rule, so now we can sound out all these words confidently. Wrong. Look at all these exceptions. How does a student know if a new word is an exception without first learning that word? Having built a machine learning system to predict the sounds of written English words, and having trained this system on 100,000 English words, we can quantitatively demonstrate that English spelling is too erratic for computer algorithms or pronunciation rules to accurately decode the correct sound. So it is not surprising that Professor Philip Seymour found that English is the hardest European language to learn to read. After a year, Finnish students can read almost perfectly, but their English counterparts can only read correctly 1 in 3 English words. It gets worse. Many Finnish children learn to read in a few months, while it takes English children 2.5 years to develop the same reading skills. So Finnish children are reading to learn for 2 years, while English students are still learning to read. The erratic spelling of English makes it harder for everyone to learn to read, but it really exacerbates the problem for people with dyslexia. Studies show that it is much easier for people with dyslexia to learn to read phonetic languages than it is to learn English with its erratic spelling. Professor Stanislaus Dehaene, in his book Reading in the Brain, talks about a dyslexia study done in Italy, a country where dyslexia is hardly ever diagnosed. After testing 1,200 students, 18 students were found who were true dyslexics, but they could all read. Not as well as other Italians, but they could read a lot better than English speakers with dyslexia. In science speak, there is a neurocognitive basis for dyslexia. Doctors can see dyslexia in brain scans, and the difference in reading performance for people with dyslexia learning different languages is due to the orthographies of the language, how phonetic the language is. So why hasn't someone fixed the English spelling problem? Well, there have been several attempts. The first attempt was done in 1568, nearly 450 years ago, by Sir Thomas Smith, who was Secretary of State to Elizabeth I. His proposal was not adopted, maybe because he wrote it in Latin. There have been many attempts to change English spelling. All involve either changing the alphabet or changing the spelling, and none has been successful. Why? One, if you change the alphabet or spelling, then people who can already read by sight see a word and instantly know its sound. They will have to relearn sight word recognition of all the words whose spelling has changed. Two, what do we do about all the materials that are already published in standard English? And three, how would you organise it? There is no organisation in charge of English like Académie Française, which was set up by Louis XIV to standardise French as a nation-building activity. The Academy recently decreed that the silent I in the French word for onion should be omitted, and there were howls of outrage. Can you see legislatures in English-speaking countries all passing the same spelling reform legislation, not just for one word, but for every non-phonetic word in English? No, significant spelling reform is not going to happen. Keeping the spelling intact is important for understanding the meaning of root words and their prefixes and suffixes. This is called morphology. The relationships between words like sign, signal, signature, and muscle and musculature would not be obvious if the silent characters were removed. So how do we address the erratic spelling of English if we can't change the spelling? I would like to acknowledge the following professors whose insights have allowed us to see a way through this conundrum: Marianne Wolfe, John Sweller, Stanislaus Dehaene, Philip Seymour, Carol Dweck, and Sally Shaywitz. Sally Shaywitz, a leading expert in dyslexia, is quoted as saying, "In the field of dyslexia, there is an abundance of high-quality scientific knowledge, so that we do not have a knowledge gap, we have an action gap. Here is an attempt to fill this gap by directly addressing the core problem, the erratic spelling of English, by making non-phonetic English words phonetic, but without changing the spelling. We do this by inserting a phonetic pronunciation guide into each English word, by adding syllable breaks, greying out silent characters, and adding visual cues or glyphs to characters to tell the reader what sound the character makes when it doesn't make its usual sound. Making non-phonetic words phonetic allows a reader to sound out any word, character by character, without any rules or exceptions. This means readers can practice independent reading, as they no longer need somebody to tell them what the sounds of non-phonetic words are. Can you see how this can help break the cycle of intergenerational illiteracy. Here is one way that English words can be expressed phonetically, called the International Phonetic Alphabet. This is how some dictionaries express words phonetically. How about this new format? Which is easier to read? The most important reason for keeping the spelling intact is the development of sight word recognition. Sight word recognition is the basis of fluent reading. Because you instantly know the sound and meaning of the word, you can devote your entire attention to understanding the meaning of what you're reading. If you can sound out a word by yourself, you are much more likely to remember that word and quickly develop sight word recognition. If you can read a word by sight with the embedded phonetic markup, you can also read that word without the phonetic markup because the shape and spelling of the word hasn't changed, as you can see from the diagram. But you will only recognise that word by sight if the spelling and shape of the word hasn't changed. No matter how many times you sound out the words in the left two columns, you will not recognise that word in standard English. That has been the problem with all the attempts to address the erratic spelling of English. The spelling and word shape changed. Now, there are just 22 visual cues or glyphs that students need to decode the sound of any English words, allowing students to practice reading independently and read what they want to read. Compare the 22 glyphs to the 100 magic words, non-phonetic sight words, that New South Wales students must currently learn by rote in their first year of school. To be a proficient reader, you need a vocabulary of at least 10,000 words. Over half these words, over 5,000 words, are non-phonetic, meaning they are not pronounced the same way that they are spelled. Does this give an insight as to why English literacy rates are so stubbornly low? Preliminary tests conducted in the New South Wales Department of Education schools show that learning to read the new phonetic version of English is faster and easier than conventional methods. It transfers to a faster learning of standard English because the spelling and shape of the words haven't changed. Let me leave you with the following thoughts. Poor literacy is an endemic problem that affects everybody. Illiteracy is not the disease, but it is the symptom of erratic English spelling and a reluctance to embrace change. A practical cure or method now exists to remove this symptom globally and help anyone read and speak standard English. Imagine the impact of fixing the 5-century-old, trillion-dollar silent epidemic.